Your Creative Push, episode 251.
Get out there and do it, because honestly, there's no magic secret. The secret is do the work.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngman Brown, and my guest today is Megan Auman. Megan is a designer, metalsmith, educator, and entrepreneur who has built a multi-faceted business around her passion for great design and sustainable business. And this is one of those episodes where you need a notepad and a pen. Definitely take notes during this episode because she has a lot of actionable stuff that you can do to grow your audience and to actually make money from your art, from your followers. Megan's specialties are Instagram and Pinterest, and she dives deep into those two platforms. She talks about how they are tailor-made for artists and some of the mistakes that people make on Instagram and Pinterest, like being overly promotional or not promotional enough. And she tells you how to evaluate where you fall on that scale and the ratio that you should be sharing of personal pictures versus pictures of your work, and her tactic of using professional images alongside conversational dialogue. Megan really opened up my eyes about Pinterest, why so many creators get frustrated and give up on Pinterest, and why they shouldn't, why they should see it as a long haul type of platform. And then Megan dives deep into the mindset and the strategy of turning your followers on Instagram and Pinterest into customers, into sales. And then finally, Megan talks about some of her own personal resistances as she tries to balance her time between her business, her art, and her teaching. A lot of great tactics there, and she also talks about her designing an MBA program, as well as her CreativeLive courses, if you want to learn more. Like I said, strap in because this is an intense episode with tons of actionable stuff for you to do to grow your following and to be inspired. Enjoy. Megan, welcome to Your Creative Push.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
No, very excited to have you. And the reason I'm really excited to talk to you is because you have both the creative brain and the business brain working on all cylinders here. And I can't wait to pick your brain about both. But maybe we could start on the creative side. Could you talk about your jewelry line and how that started and kind of what you're trying to do with that?
Yeah, so I have had my jewelry line for, I don't know, what feels like forever at this point. I'm one of those people who grew up making art. I was in drawing classes by the time I was 6, and I actually thought I was going to go to college to be a painter. And then my senior year of high school, I took a class where we made lost wax cast rings, and I was like, this is so cool. You can go to college for this? Sign me up. And so I ended up getting my BFA in metalsmithing. And then because I had no idea what to do with a BFA in metalsmithing, I went and got my MFA in metalsmithing too, because that's, totally logical.
Keep going.
Exactly. I was like, let's just get all the degrees and then we'll figure it out. But actually, going to get my MFA was really great because it kind of bought me an extra 3 years to figure out sort of what creative direction I wanted to take. And so I knew coming out of grad school, I thought I was either going to be, a university professor and teach metalsmithing, because that's what a lot of people did, or I was going to start my own business. And I got a full-time teaching position for 1 year. I was a sabbatical replacement. And I always say the biggest thing I learned in that year is that I did not want to be a university professor. I love teaching. I'm obviously super passionate about teaching. We can talk about that side of my business, in a minute. But I really wanted to have my own business and kind of be in control of what I was doing. So my jewelry line has evolved a lot. I started kind of doing the craft show circuit and realizing really quickly that wasn't quite the life I wanted. I didn't really want to stand in a tent every weekend in the rain and try to convince people to buy my stuff. So I ended up getting into a couple of really big trade shows, most notably the New York Gift Fair, which is now called New York Now. And so I kind of ended up falling into the wholesale route because it worked really well for my work. And then over the last handful of years, my work has really evolved again into more of what I would call an art jewelry direction. So I now work a lot with stones. I had always worked just predominantly in metal, and then I took a trip to India a couple years ago, discovered these beautiful black and white gemstones that I became obsessed with. And they're all, unique and one of a kind. So I've been doing more one of a kind work. And so that has shifted my business again to where I'm doing much more selling online, but it's still a little bit of a mix of everything.
Right. Learning along the way.
Exactly.
And you have spent a lot of time thinking about how you can bridge the gap between creating and selling. So why is it that you're so keen on Instagram and Pinterest for doing that?
Yeah, I think when Instagram and Pinterest first came out, and it's starting to feel like a while now that I've been on both platforms. I want to say I sort of started on Instagram first. Like I'm a real old school Instagram user. Like still used all, remember when everyone used the crazy filters and everything. And then Pinterest I think came shortly after. But when I discovered those two, I just thought, finally, like, here are the platforms for the visual artists. I had been really active on Twitter before that and, a lot of other things online, but everything sort of required those of us who had visual products to translate what we were doing into words. And I don't think my work is always very easily describable. And so when Instagram and Pinterest came out, I thought like, yes, this is where finally I don't have to try to translate what I'm doing into necessarily words. I can just show the images. And for me, that was like a huge revelation in terms of the way that artists and makers and designers could promote their work.
Right. And I saw you wrote before that like businesses should be jealous of creative people that are using visuals because of the fact that you can make a statement without words. You can make a statement by just taking, posting your work or taking a photograph of your work and posting that.
Yeah, exactly. I think, Instagram is so much easier for those of us who are visual artists. If you are a writer, or if you are a marketer or whatever other business, if you're a coach, whatever business you have to kind of sit down every day and think like, okay, if I'm using Instagram as my platform, how am I going to visually, show my world? Whereas for me every day, it's like, oh, what pretty piece of jewelry do I want to take a picture of today? So we definitely have a little bit of an advantage on those platforms. Not that other people can't make them work as well, but I feel like they're just tailor-made for us visual folks.
They are tailor-made for visual people, but I think that people still struggle with it, still struggle about, like, what should I post? Like, how should I present myself? And like, is this posting too much? So what are some of the mistakes that you see creative people making on Instagram?
Yeah, so I think the reason that people struggle is because they don't want to feel like overly self-promotional. And so the reason that they do that, the big mistake that I see people making is that they actually swing like the wrong direction. So I see people who are, like they'll post kind of their crappy iPhone photos, but then because they don't know what to say, they speak in this really marketing language. It's like I can't even do it because I've trained my brain to not do it, but it's like the blue and white whatever of the whatever is so beautiful. And it's like, well, that's not how people speak in the real world, but it's how people write on Instagram. And then it's like, well, no wonder you don't want to post because that does feel overly promotional. And so I always say, my rule of thumb is kind of, professional images, conversational copy. And you really at this point, because of the way that Instagram has sort of like, it's just everyone keeps stepping up their game. It's like high jump. The bar just keeps getting higher and higher in terms of the level of photography. And now like your crappy phone photos are just never going to cut it anymore. So you really have to have, much more professional quality. Like I personally shoot 80% of my Instagram images with my DSLR, just because it's just easier to get that high quality. So it became this like photo one-upmanship. So, really professional images are kind of the low bar now. But then I personally think that you should pair that with really conversational copy. So for me, I keep this whole bank of images and I view my Instagram as part of my creative process. So it's like, what kind of interesting images can I take with my jewelry? How can I show it differently? And so I just keep a bank of images in Dropbox. And then I'll go in and say, what am I feeling like today? What image kind of represents my mood? And then my post is very rarely. Now I do posts that are more like, hey, go buy this thing. But most of my posts are like, this is what's happening in my day, kind of engage my audience. And so I think by flipping it, instead of trying to make every post feel very markety, you can kind of use whatever your work, whatever your images that you're using to kind of narrate your life. And so it feels much more real, but your image quality still stays high.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, I can definitely understand that idea of, feeling icky and overly promotional about like what you say. But how about for people that are like, all right, the last like 9 out of 10 things that I've posted are my artwork. Do you think that's a good thing to continually post like your work and kind of promote yourself that way? Or should we be posting pictures of our dogs and cats and like making it a personal page as well?
I actually think that you should be posting the majority of your images of your artwork. And if you look at my feed, that's what I do. Almost everything is my jewelry, other than the occasional travel and I'm a big museum junkie, so you might see a museum post pop up here or there. But I think the thing is, if you're trying to gain followers and you are trying to sell your work, you don't want followers because they're interested in your dog or your cat or your kids. Unless you make baby and kids products, then you can get away with posting your kids a lot more. But for most of us, they're not interested in those things. So if you want followers that are actually interested in what you have to sell, then you have to post mostly your own work. But that being said, not every post of your own work needs to be, hey, go buy this thing. Like I said, most of mine are really this idea of, here I'm going to show you my jewelry in some way, whether that's on the model or whether that's a flat light, whatever that is. I'm going to show a picture of my jewelry, but I might talk about how I'm really darn tired today, or how I'm really excited about something that happened over the weekend, or whatever it is. And so while I would say 9 out of 10 is a pretty good rule, like 9 out of 10 images, or in my case, sometimes it's more like 19 out of 20, are really in some way about my work. I would say only about a third of those are really very directly like, hey, go buy this thing, or hey, this thing is coming, sign up for my mailing list. The rest are much more conversational.
Right. I like that. Professional images, conversational copy.
Yeah.
And that kind of takes the pressure off a little bit too, because I think a lot of people are afraid, like they don't know what to post, and they think that every post needs to be a call to action to either buy stuff or follow them on a different platform, or, fill in the blank. But to take that pressure off and be able to be conversational can actually start a conversation and create more engagement with your audience as well. And it takes the pressure off of you, because then you're like, all right, I don't have to be promo Megan, promo
Right.
whoever, you know what I mean? I can just lay back and say what's on my mind.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, no one wants to follow an account that's like, hey, go buy this thing every single post, right? That's not what we want. And so I think, right, you don't have to promote. Not every post needs a call to action. Sometimes I say, if you want to kind of up the engagement, you can certainly ask questions. But I often find that people even ask questions of their audience in a way that feels really like marketer speak and not very authentic.
Yes.
So if
I agree.
right. So if the question thing does not suit you naturally, don't do it. And you certainly don't have to ask a question on every post, because that's feels as bad as hey, go buy this thing every single post.
Right. No, I agree. Yeah, and you said something that really makes a lot of sense too. It's you want to build followers, but you want to build followers that are interested in your work. If you're interested in just having followers and making friends, maybe make a different account that's just kind of personal, where you are posting pictures of your cat and your coffee and whatever. Yeah, it makes sense that you want your followers to be people that are interested in your art, because those are the people that are going to buy your art at some point.
Exactly. And and I think doing that does not preclude you from getting a ton of followers. I know some painters who literally only post pictures of their paintings, and sometimes it's far back pictures, and sometimes it's detailed pictures of their paintings, and sometimes it's stuff in progress. And they have 20, 30, 40, 50,000 Instagram followers. So just posting your work doesn't mean that you still can't grow your account, but it means now you're growing your account just with people who are really interested in whatever your work is.
I love it. Now, what about when we don't have anything going on, anything new? How often can we post old stuff, and how often should we be posting in general?
Oh, I post old stuff all the time. I have this image of a pair of hands. I took it of my friend. It's a pair of hands. She's wearing a couple of my rings, and she's holding this berry bowl. It's like a colander filled with blackberries. And I swear I post that every 4 months, because it just always gets really good engagement. So if it's summer, I'll post it because it's summer. If it's winter, I'll post it and talk about how I wish it was summer. And so I will constantly go back and post old images all the time. I think the thing is, no one's going to scroll that far down in your feed. So if you haven't used it in the last, say 24 images, you're totally good to repost something. No one's paying that close of attention. And then generally, I try to post every day. Occasionally, I let that slide, and occasionally I'll post, somewhere between 2 to 3 times a day. I'm not one of those people who believes in a hard and fast rule, but if you've been really inconsistent with it as a platform, I say give yourself the goal of once a day. And again, don't be afraid to use the old images, to use the product photography. That's another thing. If you're an artist, if you're a maker, if you're a designer, you have this whole bank of images, which is your product photography for whatever your online shop or your portfolio or your website. So if you have that bank of images, use it. Don't be afraid to go in there and swipe stuff, even if it's sold out. I think that's another thing that people don't do enough is like if you make one of a kind, post things that are sold out because it lets people know, oh yeah, people are buying this stuff and I don't want to miss out the next time something good comes out.
Interesting. Yeah. Getting them in that mindset.
Yeah, for sure.
And then you mentioned that you use your nice camera
Yes.
to take most of your pictures. What is like the technical, like what's the easiest way to get those pictures onto your phone to post them onto Instagram?
Dropbox. I mean, whatever photo cloud sharing service you want is fine, but I love Dropbox. Like literally everything in my computer lives on Dropbox. So all of my photography, all my product photography, all my potential Instagram photography always lives in Dropbox. And then I just go in my phone, I pull the image I want. And if I need to do a little tweaking or editing on my phone, I might do that. But for me, everything lives in Dropbox and it's like a 2-second, just grab and pull. And I know for a lot of people tell me like, oh, I know my audience. I know they're really active at like 3 p.m. So I need to post then. But sometimes I can't stop what I'm doing to actually like set up and take a picture. And I'm like, right, that's why I like to batch my photos. So I'll do a big photo shoot. One of the things, if you go on my Instagram feed, is I have a project that I roughly call Megan Holds Things, which is literally just I wear a ring and I hold something in my hand. That's kind of been like one of my most creative outlets. And it always, they get great engagement. So I always do it. But like, I don't shoot those one at a time because that's a really poor use of my time. Instead, especially because I'm a metalsmith and as soon as I paint my nails and then go in the studio, they're ruined. So I'll paint my nails, shoot a big batch of photography, and then, edit it and over time and kind of keep it in my Dropbox and pull it when I want it.
Very cool. And if you hold heavy things, you can count it as a gym day too.
Exactly. Though usually for the heavy things, I call my friend who has a toddler and make her hold them because she's really good at it.
Very nice. All right, well, let's shift to Pinterest because I think that Pinterest is something that, so I personally don't use Pinterest, so I don't know much about it, but I have tried before, and I think that it might be the boat that a lot of visual creatives are in, where they've tried Pinterest and kind of given up on it because they either don't get it or it hasn't worked for them yet. And I know that you have a lot of unique ideas about why this is. So can you talk about, first of all, I guess, why you think most makers don't post on Pinterest? Is that the same reason as me?
Yeah, I think most people don't post on it. And it's funny because I am I get everyone addicted to Pinterest. My husband doesn't even have Facebook and I got him into Pinterest and he's on it all the time now. It's really funny. Nice. So that's my superpower is I can get anyone excited about Pinterest.
That's a good superpower.
But I think the reason that people don't use it or don't use it enough is there's a couple factors. One is that actually there is, and I wrote a blog post about this, something called the Pinterest lag, which is that it takes a while for content to actually spread on Pinterest, which is truthfully a good thing. So on Instagram, on Twitter, even on Facebook, if you're lucky, you get 24 hours out of a post, right? Whereas on Pinterest, you might not see a lot of traction right away. But if you can get something to go viral or show up in search or just get spread around the site a lot, it can send you traffic for years. I have posts that are more than 2 years old that still send me traffic from Pinterest every single day. The same with, product photography. I have things on Pinterest that just send me traffic all the time. But that doesn't happen overnight. And so people pin a couple of things and they say, oh, this doesn't work. And so then they back off. The other problem that I see people do is they think, well, okay, I'm going to have a couple of random boards, probably they started maybe using it as kind of a personal way to categorize things. And then they stick one board up there that's just their art or just their products or just their blog posts, whatever it is. And then the content never gets shared. And that's because Pinterest really loves relationships. So the way that content gets shared on Pinterest is Pinterest says, oh, people have pinned this image with this other image all the time. And so the next time someone pins that image, we're going to show them this other one too, because we think they're going to be interested in it. So when you only pin your work with itself, when you only pin your work to its own board, Pinterest says, okay, well, this work only relates to that work. And because no one else is pinning it yet, it doesn't show up for anyone but you. And so I think there's this fundamental misunderstanding of how Pinterest is used. And so people never get over the hump. And so they say, oh, I used Pinterest for 2 minutes and it didn't work. And so I'm just it's useless, it's pointless. Whereas the people who kind of go in and say, okay, I'm going to commit to this sort of for the long haul, eventually you kind of turn a corner and that becomes the biggest referrer of your traffic.
Right. So it's like Instagram is like short bursts of promotion or putting
Yeah.
yourself out there, whereas Pinterest is kind of like the long haul process.
Exactly. And I think the other thing that's really great about Pinterest that for me gives it an advantage over Instagram is that most of your activity on Pinterest should actually just be repinning other stuff from on the site. So if you're not a person who's great at content creation, especially in the beginning, you can amass a following and you can kind of amass an audience and really build like this whole full picture of your brand and your aesthetic on Pinterest without having to create your own content because you can repin and curate. And so for people who I think are struggling with Instagram content, actually spending time on Pinterest really helps because it helps you develop your eye and hone your aesthetic. And so I think one of the reasons that I'm able to consistently create a lot of content for both Instagram and Pinterest is because I spend a lot of time on Pinterest consuming content. And so I'm looking at the images and the art and whatever is going around Pinterest. And I'm saying, okay, like these are the things that are resonating with people. These are the things that I'm seeing a lot. And then how can I use that to kind of create my own marketing images? And then some of those get used on Instagram and some of those get used on Pinterest. But I think, if you're not consuming a lot of the visual culture that's happening online, it's really hard to turn around and create your own. You feel really stuck. Like I think, you have to kind of like feed yourself as an artist in order to create. I know for me, if I'm trying to do a lot of blog posts, I need to read more because if I'm not reading, I can't write. And I think the same thing is true of like your product photography, your Instagram content or whatever it is. If you're not consuming a lot online, it's really hard to turn around and create because you're empty. Like you don't have anything to turn around and channel.
Right. And I know that a lot of people do that. They feed that inspiration or they fill up that gas tank by just scrolling through Instagram and getting inspiration there. But yeah, I don't think there's as much of a interaction that can happen. So perhaps switching over to Pinterest and like spending those first few months gaining inspiration over there can double down as a tool to figure out how to work Pinterest and to grow your following there by repinning stuff and kind of curating your own stuff on there as well.
Absolutely. And, I use the two platforms really interchangeably. So if I'm scrolling through Instagram and I see an image that inspires me, I'll go over and I'll copy the link and I'll go in and I'll pin it to Pinterest so that I can actually, keep it a little bit more permanent than just, I double clicked it on Instagram, so I liked it. Mm-hmm. So I kind of move it into my Pinterest feed as well. So it really starts to help me see, like, these are the things that my eye is drawn to right now.
I don't know. You're getting me kind of excited about Pinterest.
Yeah, telling you, that's what I do.
I get superpower.
So many possibilities. And actually, a friend of mine who is not a very visual person, she was trying to kind of step up her Instagram game. And so she was doing that same thing. She created a Pinterest board of like all of the Instagram images that she loved so she could start to get a sense of, what kind of aesthetic she wanted to create on her Instagram.
I love it. Now, you mentioned spending a lot of time, like kind of committing and spending a lot of time on Pinterest until you get over that kind of curve. When do you see that curve happening for people?
So I think depending on the content that you're posting, it takes anywhere from like 6 months to a year for whatever you've posted to gain traction. And I say 6 months is generally a good rule of thumb, but if your content is very seasonal, it's not going to kick until the next year. So like I do a lot of blog posts around like holiday style, and usually those don't kick until a whole year later, till the next holiday season. But it doesn't mean that it's wasted time. I think it's just one of those where you actually have to kind of nurture your pins. And the other thing that I love about Pinterest is that like I use a pin scheduler for a lot of my own content. So whether it's a blog post or a product image, I'll go in. I use a service called Viral Tag, but a lot of people also use Tailwind. They're two very popular platforms. I just started on Viral Tag, and so it's what I'm familiar with. But I can sit down and I'll schedule, I want this image of, say, a new necklace that I made to post to Pinterest across multiple boards, every 3 weeks. And so I can kind of nudge it along so that I don't have to remember to pin it all the time, but I'm kind of nudging it and nurturing it to get over that like 6 month hump.
Perfect. Okay. So 6 months. I think people can do that, especially if you're curating content and you're seeing it as like this multi-purpose thing, not just like promoting yourself, but kind of like developing your own eye and just seeing, like, kind of waiting for the traction to start happening and Pinterest to catch up, the lag to catch up.
Yeah, exactly. And I should say too, like when I say, spend a lot of time, I'm not talking about spending 8 hours a day on Pinterest. I'm talking about like little 10-minute bursts here or there. That's usually my break. I tend to use Pinterest. I use it exclusively on my phone for when I'm repinning within the site, because that way it's not something that's sucking up my computer energy. I don't want to, because you can lose hours on Pinterest if you're not careful. So it's kind of like my little release on my phone. I need a little break from the studio. I'll take 10 minutes. And then the only thing I do on my computer is my kind of pin scheduling on Viral Tag. I carve out time, most mornings to kind of do my marketing stuff before I head into the studio. So I can be like, okay, I did my marketing work for the day, like wipe my hands of that. Now I'm free to go in the studio and create. And so, one of my morning marketing tasks is to go in and schedule pins on Viral Tag.
Very cool. And now we talked a little bit about what we should be saying on Instagram. What should we be saying on Pinterest?
So, Pinterest is funny because it's very different in terms of the captions, because actually if you look at Pinterest changes the way that your feed looks all the time. So this could be totally different when someone's listening to this. But right now, actually, Pinterest is really very focused on just the images in the feed, and they don't show most of the comments or most of the text at all. So it's a little bit less important in terms of that kind of conversational aspect. You don't have to worry about that. But what you do need to worry about on Pinterest is actually thinking about keywords, because Pinterest is not a true social platform. It's actually a search engine. And so you want to think about, what would someone type into Pinterest if they were looking to find this image. And I worry about that mostly with my own content. I don't usually worry about that with things I'm repinning, but with my own content, I'm always asking that question, right? What would someone type into the search bar in Pinterest if they were trying to find this necklace or these rings or this outfit? Again, talk like a human, right? We're not keyword stuffing, but I'll just describe it as if I think someone might type those words in. And so really with Pinterest, you want to spend a few minutes kind of thinking about keywords and thinking about that. And that's actually something that I love about Pinterest. I mentioned at the beginning that I thought like, oh, these platforms are amazing because we don't have to translate what we do into language anymore. That's only sort of true on Pinterest, because you still kind of need to think about that. But I actually find, as a visual person, I've never been good at SEO. But something about Pinterest search really makes sense, because I can type in keywords and see the images. And so actually what it does is it lets you see, like, if the general population of the world is typing in necklace into Pinterest, the images that are going to come up are the images that most people picture in their head when they think of a necklace or when they think of a painting or whatever it is. And you can obviously go longer tail with your keywords too. So images look very different if you type statement necklace, and they look very different again if you type black statement necklace. So you can start to play with those, but it really gives you this idea of like, okay, I think that I could describe my work this way, but clearly when I type in these words, that's not what the rest of the population thinks. So it's a really good way to sort of play around and think, okay, if I do need to put what I'm doing into language, this will help you kind of get there.
Yeah, it was super great advice. And I feel like a lot of people their minds are racing right now, thinking of all the different things that they could do. And say we start building a following on both of these platforms, how do we turn those followings, those likes, into sales?
Yeah, so it's a little bit different on each platform, and I think that's important to understand that each platform does things a little bit differently. So with Pinterest, it's actually sort of about volume, as much as I hate to say it. So people will tell me, this thing has been repinned 8 times. Why did no one buy it? And my answer is, honestly, because it's only been repinned 8 times. And so really on Pinterest, it's sort of about reaching critical mass. So the more you can kind of do that keyword research and get pins to go viral, the more likely it is that someone's going to purchase. And so that's really your best path on Pinterest, is being smart about your keywords, repinning your own content often so that it kind of gets that. But then beyond that, the step that people don't think about on Pinterest is that then they're going to click over to your site, and your site needs to be optimized for conversion. So if you have a really terrible website, or you don't have enough information describing, what it is you do and helping people understand, yes, like this is the thing that's going to show up at my house if I hit the buy button. If you don't have that, you're never going to have success with Pinterest. So, because traffic is one part, conversion is the other part. So you kind of want to look at both of those factors on Pinterest, but it's definitely about sort of building that critical mass. That said, I definitely have had things that sell off of Pinterest where they haven't had a ton of repins, but that's also because I'm really good about making sure I'm pinning as much as possible. So Pinterest in a way is sort of a volume game. Whereas I think Instagram is much more about connection. So especially it's really great for what I would call like building anticipation and then launching. So one of the mistakes that people make on Instagram is they're like, here's my thing, go buy it. And where Instagram really shines is, hey, here are the things that I'm working on. This is when they're going to become available. And here's how you can shop them. And so generally what I tell people is, instead of always trying to sell off of Instagram, especially because you can't put in all the links like you can in other platforms, I always say, like, encourage people, this is what's coming. If you really want to be the first to get it, whether, and this works for everything. It works for paintings, it works for clothes, it works for jewelry, any product category pretty much this works for, this is the thing, this is when it's coming, join my mailing list, and then you get to be the first to shop. So I don't spend as much time trying to actually sell on Instagram as I do trying to get people from Instagram onto my mailing list. Now that's starting to change. It used to be that I would say like 99% of my sales went Instagram to mailing list to purchase. Now I would say it's a little more split. It's like 60-40. So like 60% is coming from my mailing list and 40% now is clicking over directly from Instagram and actually making the purchase. So people are getting more comfortable doing that. But it's still, I think, this idea of like, here's the thing that's coming. Here's when it's going to be available. I'm going to get you all excited. Okay, now you can go buy. That really seems to work well on Instagram.
I love it. And well, I think for a lot of people also, they need an attitude shift as far as like selling work, like a mindset shift. You know what I mean? I think people are not as confident about their work, or they haven't sold anything before. And it's like, it is a very big leap. It's a kind of change of mindset. So could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, it's really hard still to sell on the internet. And I want to acknowledge that because I think people don't say it enough. We think that the internet is this magic thing that's going to solve all your sales problems, but people are really distracted online, right? Like on your phone, you can do anything in like 12 seconds. So you're like, oh, I love that thing. And then suddenly you're like doing something else on Facebook because you got a notification. And so even if they loved your thing, there's like 18 million other things distracting them from actually hitting the buy button. So it's really, really hard to sell online. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that. And so if you're struggling to sell, sometimes it helps to get offline. Like I said, I started in craft shows. I didn't stay there very long, but I got a ton of useful information just by actually interacting with humans. And then the same thing with wholesale, right? I know we forget, like, you can actually interact with humans. That actually helps. And the same thing with wholesale. I did so many wholesale shows. And so I was constantly talking to buyers. And so if you're only trying to sell online and stuff's not selling, then you have that really low confidence level because you're like, no one likes my stuff. But when you're selling in person, you're like, okay, either things are selling, so you're building your confidence, or they're not selling, but you're getting really good feedback because the truth is that people are really, like, they're brutally honest in person, right? There's something about like standing on the other side of a table or a display at a show or even in a gallery standing near your work where people will just talk about it as if you can't hear them. They make comments to their friends. They're not subtle. And so while you do have to develop a little bit of a thick shell, at the same time, you learn really valuable stuff about, what can change and what people respond to. And so I think that really helps. But then I think the other thing that you just have to kind of get over if you are trying to sell online or anywhere is that if you're trying to make money from your art, you are a business and part of your job is to sell. And so you just kind of have to like accept that that's a fact. And I like to use little tricks to kind of get over it. So in the beginning, when I was selling my own work, I used to pretend that it wasn't my work. Like, what would I say about this if it was somebody else's work? How would I get excited about it? How would I talk about it? And so I think that can help, kind of being like, okay, if you need to, I've never actually done this. It just popped into my head now, but I feel like you could be like, okay, I am Megan the artist, but when I'm selling, I'm going to be like Jenny the sales girl, right? And so like what is Jenny the sales girl going to say about the work that Megan the artist would never feel comfortable saying? So if you need to put on it, like literally put on a different hat to sell your work, I think put on that hat and see how it feels. I am also a huge fan of thinking about part-time jobs that teach you something for your business. So a number of years ago now, I was, kind of in a little bit of a rough patch in my business. And I thought, I have never worked a retail job in my life. I had, all my like summer jobs were food service. And I thought, here I am trying to sell to stores. And I've never worked in a store. I've never sold anything. Like I sold ice cream and alcohol, so I got a job at a retailer.
Those are two really great things.
Yeah,
though.
They are two really great things, but they basically sell themselves, right?
Yeah.
So I got a job at a local retailer, and it was actually, it was a chain. I worked at the J. Crew outlet because that's what I had in my town. But I got a little money. And more importantly, I actually learned how to sell. So I learned all of this language. You want to pick a place where they're actually going to train you as a salesperson and not just like dump you on the floor. But I learned so much from that job. I only had it for a few months, but it completely changed the way I talk to my store buyers. It completely changed the way I talk about my work. And so, it's okay if at any point in your business you need a job. But think about what kind of jobs you could get that would actually teach you something and help you with your business instead of just like, oh, here's my soul crushing job that I have to go to so that I can support my art. I'm always like, okay, what can I learn? And if I can get paid to learn it, that's even better.
Megan, that makes so much sense. So what about people who aren't ready to start selling online? And maybe rightfully so. Maybe they haven't built up a body of work, or they know their skills just aren't where they want them to be yet, but they do have plans to eventually sell. What would you suggest to them as they are starting to build an audience and people are checking out their work? Should they start a mailing list, or should they try to like grab their followers and keep them interested for the eventual sale?
I think everyone should start a mailing list always. I think that's so important in marketing. Mailing lists still work. So if you're not ready to sell yet, you can think of it as like, maybe this is a really long launch strategy where right now I'm just sharing what I'm making. I'm still trying to figure out, what's the right path, what's the thing to sell. And so, okay, great. I've got this thing. People are excited, and your link in your Instagram or on your website, if you've got one, let people sign up for the mailing list. Tell them something's coming in the future and you get to know first. So I think that's really important. I also think, don't be afraid of selling early, because when you put things for sale, you get a very different data set than when you're just sharing online. And I think Instagram is the perfect, case study of this. Likes and comments do not always translate to sales. So earlier this year, I was working on a project for a class I was teaching for CreativeLive. So I was making all of these samples, these jewelry samples for this class I was teaching, and I was posting them on Instagram, and people just went off like gangbusters. Oh my gosh, I love these. These are amazing. I love your new work. And in my head, it didn't start as being my new work. It just started as teaching samples I was sharing. And I thought, oh my gosh, like my engagement is great. My likes are huge. I wasn't going to, but I thought, okay, everyone loves this. I'm going to release it on my website and sell it. And the sales were like crickets. I mean, I think I sold like 2 things out of that collection and that was it. And it's like, this is crazy because everyone loves it on Instagram, but no one was buying it. Whereas the stuff that I sell the most online, which is my contour collection and the pieces with stones, there are times where like I'll post some stuff to Instagram where I'm telling people, hey, go buy this thing and this is available. And my engagement is actually really poor. Some of my worst engagement posts, in fact, it happened this week. I had a couple posts where my engagement was really poor. My likes were low, but I was selling things. And so you have to understand that the two don't always correlate. And part of that is literally if you're getting people excited enough where they're going to click over and go buy something, they probably forgot to double tap the heart to like it, or they, don't have time to comment because they're on your website buying it. And so at some point you don't know until you just put it up for sale.
Right. But what happens when you start early, but you do get those crickets to start out and it just demoralizes you?
Yeah, I think it's one of those, and this is so much easier said than done. It's like you have to figure out ways to like disassociate your self-worth with whether things are selling. And I am as bad at this as anyone. So like there are days where I'm like, no one loves my work. And then like 5 minutes later, a sale comes in and I'm like, oh, it's all great, man. Like, so, I say this understanding that it is like one of the really, really hardest things to do. But I think if you are trying to move towards a business, you do have to kind of acknowledge that you have to find your sweet spot of what's going to sell. And so I think if you think of it as like a Venn diagram, you have to find the intersection of the work that you love to make and the work that people are going to buy. And that's really the sweet spot. And sometimes you still make, like, I make the work that I love to make, knowing that it's not going to sell or it's not going to sell as well. But I have to spend most of my time in the middle of, these are the things that I'm excited about making, and these are the things that people are actually buying. And I also have things that I've been excited about in the past that I don't want to make anymore, but people still want to buy. So there's the challenge of sort of getting that out of there. But you do have to sort of look for that central point, like the things that you love to make and that people are also buying. And sometimes in the beginning, that means trying out a lot of stuff. It means testing a lot of things. And again, if the crickets are happening online, try to sell in person, see what happens. It's just, I want to like emphasize this over and over again, because I think that helps with the discouragement or that feeling of like, it's not working for me. Selling online is hard. There's so many marketers, they're going to tell you like, online is easy and it's amazing. I want to tell everyone, like, selling online is hard. And if you're struggling, you are so not alone. Like, it is tough for everybody. So don't feel like it's reflective of your art or your work. Sometimes it just means you have to shift platforms. You have to shift to, in-person selling for a little bit. It's not easy, man. And I think we don't say that enough.
Right. What are some of the other resistances that you've kind of experienced? We already talked about having to disassociate yourself and become Jenny the sales girl.
Yeah.
Do you have any other things, like both in the creation process as well as like the business side of it, that kind of hold you back?
I think for me, it's less about being held back. I really am that kind of person who is like, my job is to get in the studio every day and make things. And so, most of the time I show up and I do the work because I think that's the most important thing. But I definitely have like what I call stubbornness. So I guess what everyone would call stubbornness, but I have this stubbornness around, like I just said, you want to be mostly in the middle of that Venn diagram where it's like the things that you love to make and the things that people are buying. But sometimes I get really stubborn and I'm like, well, I'm going to make this thing. And I just don't understand why people aren't buying it. And like, I get really angry. Sometimes I just get really angry at like my audience. I'm like, why are they not buying this?
You don't understand.
Right. Like, you don't understand. This is the thing. This is what I love. So for me, like, that's sort of, I get little temper tantrums where I'm like, well, I don't care. I'm going to make this anyway. And like, you people are just dumb and whatever. and so for me, that's kind of the thing of like, again, finding that balance. And, a friend of mine who's in marketing, she told me, she's like, she's like, your point of resistance or like your greatest struggle is that you're an artist. And so like, you want to make the art first. So it really is kind of about like finding that balance. And I think, jewelry in particular is really tricky as kind of, being approached as an art form that you're also selling, because you have that factor of like, people love it. But even if they love it, will they wear it? Because people aren't going to buy jewelry that they're not going to wear. So there is this sort of factor of like, most people kind of wear boring jewelry if they wear jewelry at all. And so they're like, oh my God, I love that big necklace, but I could never pull that off. So I'm never going to buy it. So there's this other factor that comes in when you're selling jewelry that I think doesn't come in, say, if you're selling a painting, because, they don't have to wear it. They just have to hang it on their wall. So there is a little bit of like customer self-doubt that I also have to deal with.
Unless they really want to make a statement, then they might wear a painting. But
that is true. But for the most part, they're just thinking about like, do I have room for this on my wall? And is my husband going to notice if I hang up a new painting?
Right. I got you. Well, and then how do you balance the time between all the stuff you have going on? Because you have that creative side, you have that business side, and then you have that teaching side as well. So how do you balance those things?
Yeah. So for me, the big challenge in my business is definitely balancing like the creative side and that business with my teaching business. And so I tend to view them as very cyclical. So sometimes I have periods where I'm kind of just focused on teaching. So I do a lot of classes for CreativeLive. And when a CreativeLive class comes up, I kind of have to like go into my bunker where I'm just focused on writing and producing the class. And even though I love to teach and I love to work with people, actually the production of a class is very hard on me. It requires recovery time. And then for me, the recovery time is actually being in my studio. So I tend to think of those two things very like cyclically, and I'll try to be smart about like not scheduling my CreativeLive classes during seasons when I know my jewelry business is going to be very busy, because I just kind of can't mentally manage them both at the same time. So that's sort of how I balance those two. But then in terms of thinking about the business side and the creative side within my jewelry business, I very much, like I said, I kind of do this thing, like I call them my marketing mornings. So I get up in the morning. I'm actually fortunate in that my studio is not in my house. It's in this family property that we own, and they're about a mile apart. But so I get up in the morning and I'll have my tea and I'll eat my breakfast and I'll spend time every morning on the computer doing something marketing related. And my rule is like stuff has to go out. So it's not marketing unless something goes out into the world. And some mornings, literally all that is scheduling a couple pins on Pinterest. Sometimes that's, writing a blog post. Sometimes that's sending an email, but something has to go out in the world. And once I've done my marketing stuff for the morning, then that I get to close the computer and I go to the studio and I make work. And sometimes that's fulfilling orders. Sometimes that's making, stuff that I'm going to release in the future. But once the marketing's done, I get to close the computer and work on that. And then usually at the end of the day, the computer comes back out in the studio so that I can, do things like order fulfillment, which require the computer. But I like to kind of play the game where it's like, if I get the marketing task done, how long can I be in the studio without opening my computer? That's kind of my reward.
Right. I like the idea of being able to have your studio in a different location. It's like mentally refreshing in that way. Like you can kind of reset. And then also when you're in the studio, having the computer and then like mentally putting that away as well to be able to get to your creative stuff without thinking about all that other stuff. You're like, all right, I took care of this. It's done. I put a little bit out into the world and now I can get to my creative stuff, and we'll get back to that later.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think too, if you don't do that, it's also so easy to like use whatever marketing platforms as a big time suck. So if I don't do this kind of marketing morning activity, then if I tried to be like on Instagram a lot, then all of a sudden it's 2 hours later and all I did was scroll Instagram and I didn't get any work done. So really dividing those keeps me more productive on whatever I'm working on.
Very cool. Now, can you talk about designing an MBA and CreativeLive, the courses that you have going on there and what people can get from that?
Yeah, so Designing an MBA is a website that I started. It actually started with the name Crafting an MBA, but I changed it a few years later. And it actually started because I was kind of in a little bit of a funk with my business. And I told a friend of mine that I wanted to go get my MBA because, having one master's degree apparently wasn't enough. And so I said to her, I was like, maybe I should go get my MBA. And she was like, that's crazy. You could teach that stuff. And so I thought, oh, okay, maybe she's right. And so back when I started, which was late 2009, it was like, okay, well, how do you teach something? Well, obviously you start a blog. Now if I probably was starting now, I'd start a podcast, right? But at the time it was like, how do you teach? You start a blog. So I started my website and I just started, posting and sharing kind of different business tips and using it as a way to sort of explore what was and wasn't working in my business, but also helping other people who are maybe struggling. And from there, I started offering courses and programs and then ended up starting to work with CreativeLive. And so most of my teaching now I do through them because they're just such great people to work with. And it's fun to actually interact with that in-studio audience. And so I have a number of courses, the ones that are the most popular. I do a class called Sell Your Products to Retailers, which has been taken by many, many people. And I was actually just walking the New York Now trade show this past week. And I had a couple of people stop me and be like, hey, I just wanted you to know, like, I'm here because I took your CreativeLive class, which is just such an amazing feeling because when I first did that show, like I was in tears for like weeks leading up to it because I didn't know anything and I was just making stuff up and it was so stressful. And I didn't want anyone to have to go through that experience that I went through, which is why I created that class. So it's really great to know that like people are out there and they're doing it because they took my class, which is just an amazing feeling. So I have that. I have a Pinterest marketing class. So for people who just kind of wet their whistle on Pinterest, I have a whole class where I dive into it even more. And another class another big class that I did was called Make a Living Selling What You Make, which is really, it's like part math, part marketing, right? So we do a lot of math, we look at a lot of numbers, but then it's also like, okay, now that we've got the numbers, here's how you kind of create a plan to get you there.
Excellent. Designinganmba.com, and then we'll have everything linked up at today's show notes page, yourcreativepush.com/Megan Auman. And by the way, you should start a podcast.
I actually find it's way more fun just to be guests on other people's podcasts. I'm so not the techie person, which is why I love working with CreativeLive because they handle all the tech side of that. I can do all the tech stuff, but it's not my zone of genius, if you will. And so
Right.
I much prefer to just do this, go on other people's podcasts, hang out, talk with them. It's much more fun. For me, anyway. I'm sure it's fun for you to talk to everyone on your podcast, but for me, it's fun to be a guest on other people's.
Okay, well, you can be a guest on this podcast anytime you want.
Awesome. I appreciate that.
Before we let you go, it's time for the final push. And this is where I ask you to reach through the microphone and grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today, and just give them your best final words of advice and push them to pursue their own creative passions and to also start selling.
Yeah. And so I was thinking a lot about what I wanted to say here. And I think the thing that I kind of want to leave people with is to, treat your art like an athlete. And I know that requires a little bit of a backstory. And so what I'll say there is that we don't kind of give our art the same level of professionalism that we do kind of in the world of, say, like sport and athletics, right? So it's very normal especially in America, but I think in many parts of the world, for people who are not professional athletes to train like they're professional athletes, right? People who train for marathons or Ironman or CrossFit or whatever it is, like it's very normal to like commit and spend the time to try to be kind of an amateur athlete. And I think we should borrow that in the arts, give yourself that same level of dedication, give yourself that same level of commitment. Like whether you're part-time or full-time, so first of all, I should say, I do love sports. I'm a runner, but if you saw me, you would not look at me and say she's a runner. My figure is a little bit more Rubenesque. But I was watching like track and field on TV and I saw these girls and I'm like, man, like I wish I could look like that. I wish I could look like those runners. And I just thought, no, wait. They're professional athletes. It's their job to look like that. I am a professional metalsmith. My job is to get to my studio and make my work. And then, I don't want anyone to think that I'm anti-exercise. Like I think it's important. I think it's important for your creative process. But my job is not to look like a professional runner, right? My job is to get in my studio and make my work. But we're so used to like that level of acceptance and commitment for people, in sport and athletics. And I think the arts needs to do that too. So like think about how you can really make that regular commitment to your art and your creative practice. And then the same thing goes for your marketing and your sales if you are selling. So like I said, I have that marketing morning ritual where every morning I get up and I do my marketing. And so make the commitments to make your work, make the commitment to market your work, and just get out there and do it. Because honestly, like there's no magic secret. The secret is do the work.
Boom. I love it. Megan, thank you so much for coming on the show today and for really sharing your creative process as well as all these tips and tricks for Pinterest and Instagram. I am now very hyped to start your Creative Push Pinterest account. So thank you for that.
Oh yeah, you should absolutely do it. It can send you tons of traffic and it's so much fun. So thank you so much for having me and letting me talk about all of these topics that I totally geek out over.
You're welcome. Thank you. And you can find Megan on her website, which is meganauman.com. That's meganauman.com, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and of course, Pinterest. She is Megan Auman. And we'll have those links as well as Designing an MBA, CreativeLive, all the stuff at our show notes page at yourcreativepush.com/Megan Auman. Megan, thanks again.
Thank you.
Woo, a ton of great stuff there. And you're probably ready to listen to it again to make sure that you got all of the great advice that she gave. So there's not much that I can add on to that, except for the fact that I want to encourage you to start experimenting on other social media. And you know what I'm talking about. It's the one that's next on your queue that you're telling yourself, I should be there too, but I just don't have the time. But really research it. I know that it's tough. You don't want to spread yourself too thin, and I don't think that's good advice to be in everywhere just a little bit. You want to pick and choose the platforms that are actually effective for you to build followers, to build an audience, and to eventually build customers. But the social medias that you do attack, really attack them, research them. Take one of Megan's classes, research it online, approach it with a strategy, and not just posting and seeing what sticks. Put your best foot forward. If you kind of just go in blindly and post stuff and see what happens, just see what works, you might be quickly disappointed because you're not approaching it the right way, or you're not patient enough for a following to grow, like on Pinterest. So really ask yourself what you want to get out of your social media exposure. Do you want to build a following? Do you want to make sales? Do you want to have interaction with your audience? Ask yourself that question and then pick the platform that's right for you. And lastly, I want to give you a little push in the right direction for if you are thinking about selling your work. That's a question that I ask a lot of my guests. How do you know when it's the right time to sell? Because I think sometimes we jump too early, sometimes we wait way too long to start to try to sell. But I really love Megan's advice here that you don't know if something's going to sell unless you put it up for sale. Followers and likes and comments are one metric, but like Megan said, something that people double tap and like doesn't necessarily mean they want to buy it. And if you're thinking about making sales, if you're thinking about developing a body of work that you are making for other people to have and give you money for, then the best way to figure out what that centerpiece of that Venn diagram is to start making it available for them to buy, to see what sticks, to see what people are willing to pay you money for, so that you can really hone in on that niche. So again, a ton of great stuff here. You might want to listen again. You definitely want to check out all of the resources that Megan dropped. Definitely check out her website, meganauman.com, and check out everything we talked about today at the show notes page at yourcreativepush.com/Megan Auman. On our next episode, we have Amanda Giacomini. You might remember Maria Brophy talking about Amanda. She started this amazing project called 10,000 Buddhas, where she set a goal to paint 10,000 Buddhas around the world. So she comes on the show to talk about why she started that project and some of the resistances that came up during this very massive project. You can find her at 10,000buddhas.com, or on Instagram she is 10,000buddhas, or you can find it on today's show notes page at yourcreativepush.com/251. But that's all I've got for you today, so hopefully you were inspired to go and get your work done, put yourself out there, create new accounts on social media, and approach those accounts in a smart way. I love you all so much. Go get some amazing work done, and we will see you next time. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.